Anyway, meanwhile, in the Rosenstein story breaking today, the Washington Post is reporting that the Deputy Attorney General, quote, told the president more than once that he agreed Trump was being treated unfairly. He's pandering to him, enabling him. But in a statement to the Washington Post, Rosenstein said the only commitment he made to Trump about the probe, the Mueller probe, is the same he made to Congress, that as long as I was in charge, it would be conducted appropriately. Barbara, it does seem when he says things, I'm going to land the plane, I mean, it sounds to me like he's going to limit it. He's going to keep the president safe, like he's a passenger on that plane. Your thoughts?
That is a very concerning choice of words. I mean, to say that I'm going to make sure it's conducted fairly sounds appropriate to me. But I agree with you. When you say I'm going to land the plane, it sounds like he's assuring President Trump of a certain outcome. We were, as a country, very troubled by the fact that Loretta Lynch sat on a plane tarmac with President Clinton, former President Clinton, before during the investigation of Hillary Clinton's emails, when they talked about their grandchildren. This, I think, should be even more alarming when they're talking about the outcome of an investigation. I still have some faith in Rod Rosenstein, and I think that the way to get to the bottom of it is to call him before Congress and ask him what he communicated to President Trump. And was this just an effort to calm him that things would be fair, or was it an assurance that he would make sure that things came out okay as long as he was there?
Why did Rod Rosenstein enable Trump? David, why is he there caught? I mean, I know that long-term civil servants, especially high rank, I've worked in government, they're supposed to be accommodating. They're supposed to work with the elected people, the people who come in, like the president, of course, and his people. They're not supposed to be resistant to them, but they're not supposed to encourage them in their worst directions.
Yeah, no, Chris, that's a great question, because when this story broke, the first thing it conjured up for me was to go back and look at the original Rosenstein memo that in many ways introduced Rod Rosenstein to the nation. Recall James Comey, I think it was May 3rd of 2017, testified to Congress that, in fact, the Trump campaign was one of the targets of the investigation. Trump kind of lost his mind, summoned Rosenstein, said, write a memo for why I should be able to fire Comey and put the Russia stuff in it. That's what we learned from the Mueller report. And Rosenstein, instead of doing what McGahn did and said no when he was pushed on a certain issue, or K.T. McFarland said no, Rosenstein said, well, I can't go exactly in that direction, but Mr. President, I'll give you what you need to fire Comey. There was an uncertainty in real time back in May of 2017. Why would Rod Rosenstein, knowing that the president was simply angry that Comey had fingered him at this testimony, turn around and justify the complete wholesale firing of the FBI director? Look, hopefully Barbara's right, and we learn more about this, and Rosenstein has an opportunity to explain this more. But it injects a lot of uncertainty now, learning that Rosenstein continued to suggest to the president, I can land the plane, when in fact all of this started by him agreeing to fire or justify the firing of Comey by Donald Trump.
Well, isn't that an apt metaphor for how he and Barr did it? They landed the plane so safely, so carefully, that for 4 weeks we thought the president was exonerated on all fronts. I'd say that was a pretty good landing. That's when you clap, when the plane...
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.